It's hard not to compare The Lord of the Rings to Game of Thrones. They're both high-grossing fantasy series, and Lord of the Rings really set the bar in that arena. But did the HBO version of Game of Thrones borrow too heavily from the Tolkien classics? They say imitation is a form of flattery, but we'll show you 10 times Game of Thrones went way over the line. Never healing. It's easy to look at the noble to a fault Jon Snow and compare him to Aragorn, but in some ways he's more like a certain hobbit we all know. We know Jon is afflicted with wounds that don't seem to be healing. We saw him in Season 7 when Daenerys was by Jon's bedside, and when Tormund slapped Jon's chest in Season 8, it seemed like he was still in pain. Hey, Jon Snow is at least doing a lot better than most people who end up with multiple stab wounds. Although Arya seems to be pretty resistant too, maybe it's a Stark thing. Frodo also had a never-healing wound caused by the Morgul blade. Not only does it not heal physically, but he talks about being forever changed by what happened to him, the burden he bears, and his desire for respite. Although he saved the day for everybody, he really isn't able to just lay back and enjoy his retirement. According to George R.R. Martin, Frodo is never whole again. Instead of returning to the Shire, he sails off with the elves to the Grey Havens. He heads off into the unknown, while everyone else picks up their lives pretty much where they left off. It's not hard to see that the same thing happened with Jon Snow. He saves the world from the Mad Queen and then is promptly shipped off to the distant north, while everyone else just reaps the fruits of his labor. Sam.
He didn't know where to put it.
There are many people out there who believe the true hero of Lord of the Rings wasn't Frodo, but his best friend Samwise Gamgee. And there's definitely something to be said for that idea. The parallels between Frodo's BFF Sam and Jon Snow's BFF Samwell Tarly have always been glaringly obvious. Both characters grew up in the shadows of their fathers only to subvert those expectations later in life. They both excelled in academics far beyond what was expected of them, and although they've been described as cowardly, they're steadfastly a hobbit named Rosie, and the two of them raise a family together. Samwell makes it clear that he and Gilly are a family with little Sam, and a new baby on the way to be named Jon if it's a boy. In The Lord of the Rings, Samwise intends to name one of his children after Frodo, but it turns out to be a girl. The Iron Throne. Now let's talk about the Iron Throne, the seat of power in Westeros. Well, or at least it was before Drogon melted it down during the final episode. It might not have been imbued with magical powers like the One Ring, but it was an object which just seemed to bring out the worst in some people. In Lord of the Rings, Frodo was deemed the perfect person to transport the ring because he has no desire for power and his heart was pure. We saw over and over again examples of what happened to those who got too close to it and felt the yearning of power threaten to overtake them. Gollum is one of the obvious examples of this, but we also saw this behavior from Boromir and Galadriel. And really, it's kind of the same thing that happened to Daenerys. Sure, she hadn't been shy about burning things to the ground before, but the closer she got to the throne, the more out of control she got. She made it seem as though she wanted to stop Cersei because she was a tyrant, yet she bristled at the idea of an independent North when Sansa brought it up. Then she said she was going to bring her forces to Winterfell and pretty much everywhere else after she took King's Landing. It's like the Iron Throne had the same effect on her as the ring had on the people of Middle-earth. Finality. It's no secret that just like the rest of us, George R.R. Martin is a huge Lord of the Rings fan. He admits to admiring the works of JR Tolkien immensely, and says there was one moment from the books which really blew his mind the first time he read it. When Gandalf faced down the Balrog, he succeeded in getting everyone to safety, but at the cost of his own life. After fighting for 2 days and 2 nights, which makes us tired just thinking about it, Gandalf defeated the Balrog. But the fight proved fatal for him as well. Apparently, a young George R.R. Martin was deeply affected by this. The shock of losing such an important character made the suspense of the subsequent story all the greater, because suddenly, nobody was safe. Martin says this encouraged him not to be shy about killing off characters in his own work, which shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone who's watched Game of Thrones or read the books. And just like Gandalf perished only to come back again, so did one of Martin's characters. Ruling. Gandalf may have inspired George Thrones. It turns out Martin does have some criticism of Tolkien and believes he glossed over the finer points, the answers to things like, what was Aragorn's tax policy? And did he maintain a standing army? Thanks. Now we really want to know the answers to those things too. So it's not hard to see that Martin sought to answer many of those questions in Game of Thrones. The show doesn't end with Daenerys losing her life and Jon taking the throne. Instead, there are meetings to be had, appointments to be made, and even punishments to be doled out. Sure, there are still unanswered questions, but a lot of those loose ends got tied up, and we can only assume we'll get more details if he ever finished The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring. Maybe Tolkien didn't give a lot of thought to orc politics, but at least he finished his books. Melting. We aren't saying fire's the answer to everything, but it does seem to solve a whole lot of problems in Westeros. We've seen our heroes both defend and destroy King's Landing using fire. Cersei used it to blow up the Sept of Baelor, and it was used as a weapon against the Night King's army. Sure, it won't win you a Father of the Year award, but there's no denying it gets things done. It's also been used in a meaningful way in both Game of Thrones and The Lord of the Rings. Earlier, we talked about the similarities between the Iron Throne and the One Ring, and both of these artifacts met similar fates. Both of these objects were deemed far too dangerous to keep existing, and no shortage of lives had been lost in pursuit of them. So in the end, they were both treated with the healing and cleansing power of fire. They were melted down so they couldn't tempt anyone ever again. Many fans felt Drogon destroying the Iron Throne was unnecessary, but it's possible this was meant to parallel the fate of its Lord of the Rings counterpart. Scenes. There are a lot of major characters and plot points that are extremely similar between The Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones, but there are also some strikingly similar scenes. During the final episode of Season 8, we saw the 3 remaining Stark children bid farewell to Jon Snow as he got ready to board a boat taking him north to the Wall. Or at least what's left of the Wall. We couldn't help but think of Sam, Merry, and Pippin saying goodbye to Frodo before he journeys to the Grey Havens. The way both scenes were shot even looks strikingly similar. Then there's another major moment from the final Game of Thrones episode which shows Drogon carrying the body of Daenerys away after he torches the Iron Throne. The shot is weirdly reminiscent of the books. It probably isn't a huge surprise that authors George R.R. Martin and JR Tolkien were big readers. We know it's truly shocking. But they also just had to go ahead and make sure their readers had this point underlined for them. We had a feeling this was coming in Game of Thrones when Bran talked about how the Night King wants to destroy him because he wants to destroy all of Westeros' history. Then there was the scene where Tyrion settles in to hear more about fascinating wheelchair lore from Bran, and basically it was made abundantly clear that knowledge is power, even in Westeros. Bran was even put on the throne because of his qualifications of, well, no. We saw Bilbo telling the story of the Hobbit in his book There and Back Again. Frodo took Bilbo's book and then added his own stories to it. Girl power. Life isn't easy for a woman in Westeros. Well, it's not easy for anyone really, but women have their own unique set of challenges. Yet we've also seen female characters do incredible things and overcome tremendous odds. This is something we've also seen in The Lord of the Rings. Many fans were shocked to learn it was Arya Stark who would bring down the dreaded Night King. According to Maisie Williams, even her boyfriend thought it should have been Jon Snow instead. But considering Arya spent years training as a stealthy assassin, it makes a lot of sense she was the one to deliver the final blow. It harkened Aragorn. It seems like there are a lot of parallels between Jon Snow and Frodo personality-wise, but Jon does have a lot in common with another Tolkien character, Aragorn. Jon is the descendant of Targaryen kings on his father's side. While his mother's family ruled the north, Aragorn was descended from the kings of Gondor, and his mother was descended from the king of the Northern Kingdom. Both men take after their mother's physical appearances. It's not hard to see how the white tree sigil of House Elendil resembles the sacred weirwood trees from the north. Both men led warriors in the north and lost their fathers when they were young. Afterward, they were raised by other people who kept their lineage a secret. But they both were rightful heirs who took on other names in order to keep their identities hidden. While their stories may have played out differently, there's no denying these characters have a ton in common. What do you think about the similarities between The Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones? Do you think these moments cross the line from paying homage to outright copying? Let us know what you think in the comment section below, and then click on that subscribe button for more videos from us here at ScreenRant. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next time.